Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Paint Everywhere. I know it's been a long time since I have done one of these. Oh, by the way, I am recording this podcast from the patio of the outside of my house because it's way too nice to be sitting inside today. So if you're hearing birds or some wind noise, that's why you're hearing that. And I'm just not gonna sit in a podcast booth. For one, I don't really have one. I have a makeshift one in my basement, but I'm not gonna um, sacrifice, my day off sitting inside. So I just wanted to jump on and do another one because it's been so long. But what are you gonna do, man? Life is busy. I have kids and I have a full-time job, and I'm painting as much as I can, and I love doing it too. So, um, you know, it's it's a juggle, and I know I'm not alone. And that's the thing. You can come. And it sounds like you're complaining when you talk about how busy you are, but it's just a fact of life. And some things fall by the wayside, and this is one of the things that fell by the wayside. Um, and I'm going to keep this one simple too. I think, and if anyone's done podcasts or if you've watched podcasts, especially, if you're listening to this one, you're obviously just listening to the audio version of it. But a lot of times, I post these on YouTube, and then I have visuals to go along with it too. And that takes time because then you have to edit in the visuals, and I'm not going to do that this time. So I'm just going to ramble and talk about some things that I hope that you find interesting, that I kind of have on my mind. Um, After I've been painting for a little over 2 years now. I celebrated my 2-year anniversary in June of selling my first painting. So it was really cool. Um, that I've been um, painting for 2 years, on a part-time basis. Um, so much has happened, but I'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the things I wanted to jump into and talk about is my story. And I think people ask a lot. How did you get started in doing this? And I almost feel like I've been telling the wrong story. I've been doing some thinking about this, and I maybe the wrong story isn't the right word, but it's something when you do some soul searching on why you do what you do, things can come up. So I started painting in the uh, the spring of 2023, and I'll tell you the story that I tell people, and then I'll tell you the real story of why I started painting, that I think that I've kind of discovered recently. When I paint, um, I I I don't you know really think about the greatest thing in the world about for me about painting is I don't um, I listen to music, but I'm not thinking about the past, or I'm not thinking about the present. I'm not thinking about the future or the past. I'm just kind of in the moment, and I'm there with my thoughts, and it's really really cool. Um, but I think this is one of the things that I think about. I think about things when I'm painting. I think about why I'm painting, and thinking about why I'm doing this, what my motivations are. But um, so this is kind of where I kind of came to my epiphany of you think a lot about why you're doing what you're doing, whether you're working in a 40-hour a week job, as an accountant or as a lawyer or a surgeon or a construction worker. You think about what is this all about. So I started um, painting, like I said, in it was spring break of 2023, and I have two daughters, and they're well, they're teenagers now, and they were almost teenagers then. And we have a blank cinder block basement wall. We had Our basement is unfinished, and about 5 years ago, the walls were starting to cave in because we have it's a kind of a long drawn out story, and I'll make it very quick, but we have clay is our soil around our house, and a lot of the homes where I live are the same situation. So the soil starts to cave in around the house, and you have to have the basement supported by beams. So we had to have the sides of the basement dug out around the outside of the house, and they had to support all the walls with these beams. It was this big, long, very, very expensive process. Um, so we moved into our house, 15 years ago, and we wanted a new kitchen, but we didn't get a kitchen, but we got beams in our basement. So that was fantastic. But ever since then, we've had these steel beams in our basement, and it's been unfinished, and we've had nothing down there. But we've finally painted the basement walls just plain old white. And my kids were like, there's nothing on the walls. It's very barren, and we need to put something on the wall. Uh, Excuse me while I take a sip of water. But anyway, um, so yeah, we painted our basement white, and my kids are like, we need to paint the basement, or we need to hang some art on the wall. Now, um, I did some abstract painting, years ago, some 20 years ago, just because it's something that's just kind of, I guess, always festered inside me, with this desire to want to paint. And I did it. And that was kind of at the beginning of my photojournalism career, which is what I still do now. I'm a full-time photojournalist at a local newspaper in Milwaukee. Well, it's not really a small local newspaper, it's the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Um, but that was kind of at the beginning of my career, like 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And I started really getting into, honing in on my skill as being a photojournalist, and I started getting into doing video journalism. And um, I the painting only lasted probably about, 6 months, maybe a year, and I kind of just I put it by the wayside, and I got way more into doing stuff with photojournalism with my career. Um, you know, so I just got into that. The painting fell to the wayside. I stopped doing that, but I still had I had some canvases. I had this makeshift easel that I put together that was still in my basement. I had paint. So my daughters are like, you still have all this paint and these canvases and an easel, and why don't you paint some paintings for the basement wall that we have unfinished and barren? And so I did, and I said, well, why don't we all paint something for the wall? Why don't we all paint a little painting, and we can decorate the white, bare, boring basement wall. So we painted these paintings, and something in me, a light turned on, and I thought, this is really cool. I really enjoy. Um, I remembered how much I enjoyed painting, and I just did this little abstract, tree painting thing, and it was a 4x4, just a little tiny canvas, a 4x4, and my two daughters did something. Actually, my older daughter did a digital uh, thing, and we printed it on canvas, and it was really cool. But like I said, a light went on, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. I remember doing this. I want to do it again, and I got a bigger canvas and painted another one, and then I had always wanted to do a larger canvas, like a great big 4x5 or 4 feet by 5 foot or 48 by 60 inch canvas. But something inside of me had always I was always, you have voices in your head that tell you things that are not real. Like, you can't do those big canvases. Those are for professionals. They're too expensive. You're not there yet. And I didn't even really, ever consider it or look into it. But I had a friend of mine. His name's John, and he sent me a text, and he said, "Hey, these big, huge canvases are on sale at Michael's for, normally they're $100, and everything's always on sale at Michael's. They were two for $100, so they're $50 each." So I went, and I just said, "Screw it, man! I'm gonna go and get a couple of these canvases, and get some paint and just go to town. And I did. And it was fantastic. I had this huge, big surface to just let my, imagination run wild and let my creativity go. And it was great. And I loved it. And I painted, this one great big painting. And that was, so we painted our basement on, spring break in March of 2023. And I before I did that great big canvas, I painted a whole bunch of, medium, smaller size, and kind of got bigger and bigger until I got that great big one. But by the by June, I was painting on, I bought that great big canvas and painted it, and then I really liked it. It looked really cool, and it was just an abstract, colorful yellow and blue and red, and it really didn't, you know, it wasn't representative of anything. It was just me and my, creativity on a canvas. I always kind of say that I feel like when I'm painting, the paint, is in charge. It really does what it wants to do. I have a great respect for paint. I know this sounds esoterical, but I have a great respect for it. I have no control. I mean, I do have, you know, I shouldn't say I have no control. I can control a little bit, but I know when the paint is telling me, "Hey, dude, what are you doing? You're not in charge here." So I don't feel like I'm in charge over the paint. I have a gratitude for the paint for letting me be able to make the things I'm able to make with it, if that makes any sense at all. So I feel grateful that it's allowing me to use it in a way to create beautiful things. So when I was done with this painting, I was like, this looks pretty cool. It was a great 4 foot by 5 foot painting, and I stood back and I looked at it. I'm like, I'm gonna post this on Facebook Marketplace and just see if anyone will buy it. And I did my very crude, I didn't have any idea, like how to price it or whatever. And I just thought, I calculated my time. And then, I've done, as a photographer, I've done freelance stuff and kind of figured, okay, if I do a day rate or something like that. And, I mean, this painting, it took me several days to do it. And that's another thing too. So when I paint, it's down in my basement, and it's not like I go down there for 6 hours and paint for 6 hours at a time. I have kids and a family and a full-time job, and sometimes if I go and throw a load of laundry down in the laundry, I'll paint for 10 minutes, and it's acrylic paint, so I can paint for a few minutes, wash it up, and then get back at it later on, and I can clean it up pretty quickly. um, and 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 I don't know enough about oils. I just know that I've tried them a couple times and it takes a lot longer to clean up, and I don't really have enough knowledge of the the intricacies of oil painting to I just know it took a lot longer to clean up than it did acrylic paint. So I just stuck with acrylic because I can clean it up quicker. I can paint for 5 minutes, and while I while my wife's making dinner, or while the the clothes are in the dryer, and then I can clean up and run upstairs and take care of something. So anyway, um, I you know I this was an acrylic painting. I put it on Facebook, and I calculated my time, how long it took, and I just said, okay, $1,500. I'm gonna see if I can sell it. And a day later, somebody was like, I like it. I will come and take a look at it. And a guy came over, a nice guy, and his wife and his adorable little daughter came over and take a look at it, and they said, we'll take it. And it was too big for their car, so I brought it over to his house the next day. And you know it, I don't know what I was expecting. I thought, this great big painting for this much money, it's going to be some rich guy with a big fancy car, and he's going to have a huge house with a huge big wall. And it was not like that at all. I mean, brought it over to their house. They had a modest sized Cape Cod, but a wall that was big enough to put a 4 foot by 5 foot painting, and it looked beautiful. Um, and it was really cool. So I just kind of kept going, and I think when I tell my story, that's kind of where it starts. And I tell people, well, my kids wanted me to paint something for the wall, and that's kind of where it started. And I don't know if that while that is part of my story, I don't really know if that's why I started painting. I mean, that's part of why I started painting. And but when I started this podcast, I thought, I said that, you know, I think I've been telling the wrong story because I feel like, you know, like I like when I started painting 20 years ago, like I said, it was just something in me that was festering. And when I stopped painting, it's not like the desire to keep doing abstract painting went away. It was still in me. It was still festering. And I knew that because it just every time I would go and I would look at art and I would look at abstract art and I would see it on the wall, it was it was driving me crazy because I would look at it and I would look at the art and I would not. The thing is, and I don't want you to be confused. I wouldn't look at it. I don't look at other people's abstract art, and I wouldn't look at it and I wouldn't say to myself, I could do that. I don't say, oh, I could do that. I would just say, I need to do that. That was something I was just saying. I need to start doing that. And it just went on and on, like, and so I'm a daily photographer. I go out every day. I take photographs, and I was finding myself too, I would take a photograph, of, I'd go to a press conference and take a picture of, the mayor speaking. And, before I would take pictures, I'd get an accidental photo of my foot, and I would come back from my assignment and I would look at that photo of the blurry picture of my foot and I would start cropping it or, toning it and turning it into a piece of abstract art, and I would, say, okay, I got to get back to what I was doing, to my regular assignment, and it was just, I would, and I would, on my own time, I would go and take just crazy different abstract photos. So that the art side of me was just, it was in there and it needed to come out, and it needed to be there, and it needed to come out sooner rather than later. So, um, it was just and I think what was stopping me and was doubt, and it was fear too. I didn't think, I'm a photographer. I'm not an artist. I'm not an abstract artist. I'm not a painter. Stay in my lane. And when I started posting, when I decided to post the photos of my art, that was really scary too. I didn't, when people, I've always posted photographs, me pictures of, you know news events, or I do a lot of nature photography too, moon rises and sunsets, and people are used to seeing that from me. And when what are people going to say when all of a sudden I start posting photos of abstract paintings that I've done? Are they going to say, "What are you doing, dude? You're not a abstract artist. You're a photographer. You know, don't do other things." All these doubts and all these, voices in my heads were telling me not to do it. But that's all they were. They were just voices in my head. I only have one head, telling me not to do something. And, I think you have doubts like that all the time when you're trying something new. And to be honest with you, it gets a lot easier with age, I think, for me especially, because you start to really not care what people think anymore. For me, the older I get, you start to realize that, I'm 53 years old, and I'm like on the backside of my life, and life is really, really short, and you only get one chance at this, and you got to try and do different things, or life is going to run out and you're going to be wishing you woulda, shoulda, coulda, and or it's going to be too late. So, I started realizing that, and I'm like, I'm just going to go for it. And the other aspect of this of my story too is, a little bit. so I started doing the abstract painting in 2023, and around 2019, I worked in a building. The Journal Sentinel was in an old press building. It was really cool. It was an old newsroom. The building is an old newspaper, and they had a press room where they had an old press, and they tore out the press, and the walls were just filled with old ink, and it was so cool. And I would go down there with my camera at night, after I was done with my shift, and I would just wander around and take abstract photos of the ink on the wall. And I would just do it for me, just because I thought it looked really cool. And I think that was kind of the gateway to my abstract painting, because these photos of this ink splattered on the wall, they look a lot like my abstract paintings. So even then, it was the entryway into my abstract painting, part of my life. So I guess when I tell my story, I leave that part out of it. I tell the part about starting in my basement, and my kids encouraging me, which is a huge part of it. But I forget about the part, and I don't really tell the part about the fear that went into me posting images of paintings, and wondering what people are going to think, but really not caring, because if you wait, and there's never going to be a perfect time or perfect moment, to just say, what the f, and just go for it. You have a lot of things sometimes that are in you that you think, I want to try this, I want to go for it and just see what happens. I did that with I've wanted to do improv comedy forever. I just, for something, I would watch Saturday Night Live as a kid, and I thought I would love to get up there on a stage and just try to do improv comedy. And I finally did it. I tried it. I went and did, it was with a comedy group here in Milwaukee, and I did it, and it just was not my thing. I just I'm not a good listener, and that's what improv is all about. It's all about listening. And it just, is one of those things that just didn't work. So sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, but you don't know until you try. So, um, I guess I just wanted to get on here and maybe fill in some of the void that has been going on, between my last podcast, which I don't even know how long it's been. And it doesn't matter, because I'm just going forward. I'm not looking back, and just kind of reintroduce myself to you if you're just stumbling onto this podcast. I do have a website. It's miketosisti.com. It's very easy to remember. If you can see my name anywhere around this podcast somewhere, I'll put a link in the show notes. That'll be easy to find. Check out my work. But I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and go out and try something new if you've been afraid to do it, because who the hell cares? Nobody cares. Nobody really cares what anyone thinks. You only get one shot at this, so go for it. All right, thank you. Bye.